क्रियाः योगेनाव्यभिचारिण्या धृतिः सा पार्थ सात्विकी.
That resolute steadfastness by which, O Parth, one governs through the practice of yoga, operations of the mind, the life breaths, and the senses, is immaculate. Yoga is the process of meditation, whereas the coming into mind of any impulse other than the impulse to such contemplation is moral transgression. Straying of the mind is deviation from the path of virtue. The unwavering resolution with which a man rules over his mind, breath, and senses is therefore of the nature of goodness. Directing the mind, the vital breaths, and the senses towards the desired goal is the morally excellent fortitude.
धृत्याधारयतेऽर्जुन प्रसंगेन फलाकांक्षी धृतिः सा पार्थ राजसी.
That steadfastness, O Parth, by which the avaricious man holds fast and acquisitively to obligations, wealth, and pleasure, is of the nature of passion and moral blindness. Firmness of will in this case is concerned primarily with the discharging of one's worldly duties, acquisition of wealth, and sensual pleasure, the three primary objects of material life, rather than with final liberation. The final end may be the same, but in this case the seeker aspires to fruits and desires something in return for his labor.
Yaya swapnam bhayam shokam vishadam madamevacha न विमुञ्चति दुर्मेधा धृतिः सा पार्थ तामसी.
And that steadfastness, O Parth, by which the evil-minded man declines to forsake sloth, fear, worry, grief, and also arrogance, is of the nature of ignorance. Next, Krishna considers the three types of happiness.
Sukham tvidanim trividham shrinu me bharatarshava अभ्यासाद्रमते यत्र दुःखान्तं च निगच्छति.
Now listen to me, O the best of Bharat, Arjun, on how even happiness, which one comes to dwell in by practice, and thus achieve the cessation of griefs, is also of three kinds. This happiness is that which the seeker attains to by spiritual discipline. He achieves it by concentrating his mind on the cherished goal, and this happiness is therefore a destroyer of griefs.
Yattadagre vishamiva pariname mritopamam tatsukham satvikam proktam आत्मबुद्धिप्रसादजम्.
That happiness, which is at first like poison, but finally tastes like nectar, for it issues forth from the lucidity of an intellect that has realized the self, is of an impeccable nature. The happiness that is come by through spiritual exercise, concentration of mind on the desired end, and in which all griefs come to an end, is bitter like venom at the commencement of worship. Prahlad was hanged and Mira was poisoned. Sant Kabir has pointed out the difference between the pleasure-loving world that feasts and falls into unconscious slumber, and himself who stays awake shedding tears of contrition. But although this happiness is like poison at the outset, at the end it is like nectar that confers the substance of immortality. Such happiness, born out of a clear understanding of the self, is said to be pure.
विषयेन्द्रिय संयोगात् यत्तदग्रे मृतोपमम् परिणामे विषमिव तत्सुखं राजसं स्मृतम्.
That happiness which springs from the association of the senses with their objects, and which is like nectar at the beginning, but like gall at the end, is said to be tainted with passion and moral blindness. The happiness obtained from the contact of the senses with their objects tastes like nectar in the course of enjoyment, but like poison at the end. For this kind of happiness leads to repeated birth and death. So such happiness is rightly said to be impassioned and afflicted with moral blindness.
यदग्रे चानुबन्धे च सुखं मोहनमात्मनः निद्रालस्य प्रमादोत्थम् तत्तामसमुदारितम्.
That happiness which both initially and finally beguiles the self, and which arises from slumber, lethargy, and negligence, is said to be of the nature of ignorance. The happiness which both in the course of indulgence and subsequently deludes the soul, lays one unconscious in the dark night of worldly life, and which is born out of indolence and futile efforts, is of the nature of ignorance. Krishna then proceeds to recount the scope of the properties of nature that ever pursue us.
न तदस्ति पृथिव्यां वा दिवि देवेषु वा पुनः सत्वं प्रकृतिजैर्मुक्तम् यदेभिः स्यात् त्रिभिर्गुणैः.
There is no being, either on earth or among the dwellers of heaven, who is entirely free from the three properties born of nature. All beings, right from Brahma at the top to worms and insects at the lowest, are transient, mortal, and under the sway of the three properties, sattva, rajas, and tamas. Even heavenly beings, including the various external gods, are subject to the malady of these properties. Here, Yogeshwar Krishna has taken up the subject of external gods for the fourth time. That is, Gods were spoken of in chapter 7, 9, and 17. All the statements so far made by Krishna imply that the gods are influenced by the three properties of nature. Those who worship such gods, in reality, worship that which is perishable and impermanent. In the third section of Srimad Bhagavat, while describing the meeting of 9 Yogeshwaras with the exalted sage Shukra, during the discourses, the sage Shukra said that for love between male and female, the Lord Shankar and his consort Parvati, for sound health, the Ashwani Kumars, the celestial physician twins, for victory, the Lord Indra, Lord God of heaven, and for material riches, Kuber, God protector of wealth. These external gods are to be worshipped. Similarly, talking of various desires at the end, he gave the verdict that for fulfillment of all desires and for salvation, one shall worship the Lord Narayan alone. Therefore, one shall remember and call to mind the omnipresent one, and for such accomplishment, the only available means is to take refuge in an accomplished teacher, asking sincere questions and rendering service. The devilish and divine treasures are two traits of the inner realm, out of which the divine treasures enable one to have the great vision of the Supreme Being. Hence, they are called divine, but yet are within the influence of the three properties of nature. When the three properties of nature are pacified, the seeker also shall experience that absolute peace within. After this, that immortal yogi shall have no more duties left to perform. The question of the organization of men into 4 classes, or varn, that was initiated much earlier is now reintroduced. Is one's class determined by birth, or is it the name of the inner ability gained from one's action?
Brahmana Kshatriya Visham Shudranam Cha Parantapa Karmani Pravibhaktani Swabhava Prabhavair Gunai.
The duties of Brahman, Kshatriya, Vaishya, as also of Shudra, are determined by properties that are born out of their nature. If a man's nature is made up of the property of goodness, there is inner purity along with the ability to meditate and worship. If the dominating property is that of ignorance, lethargy, sleep, and insanity are the outcome, and the attempted action is at their level. The capacity of one's natural property is his varn, his character. Similarly, a partial combination of goodness and passion constitute the Kshatriya class, whereas a partial combination of the property of ignorance and that of passion constitutes the Vaishya class. This is the 4th time when Yogeshwar Krishna has taken up the issue. He named Kshatriya in chapter 2 and said that there is nothing more propitious for a Kshatriya than a righteous war, in verse 31. In chapter 3, he said that although inferior in merit, one's own natural calling, dharma, is the best, and even meeting with death while upholding it results in good, whereas an obligation or duty other than one's own, even though well observed, generates nothing but fear and dread, in verse 35. In chapter 4, then, he indicated that he is the creator of the 4 classes in verse 13. Does he mean by this that he has divided men into 4 rigid castes determined by birth? His answer to the question is an emphatic no, and he asserts that he has but divided action into 4 categories according to their inherent properties. The innate property of a being or object is a measure, a yardstick. So the division of mankind into four varna is only a division of the one and same action into four stages according to the motivating properties. In Krishna's words, action is the mode of attaining to the one inexpressible God. The conduct that takes one to God is worship, which commences in faith in the desired end. So meditation on the Supreme Being is the one true action that Krishna has divided into four steps in his system of varna. Now, how are we to know to which property and stage we belong? This is what Krishna turns to in the following verses.
शमोदमस्तपश्शौचम् क्षान्तिरार्जवमेव च ज्ञानं विज्ञानमास्तिक्यम् ब्रह्म कर्म स्वभावजम्.
Self-restraint, subduing of the senses, innocence, continence, mercy, uprightness, piety, true knowledge, and direct perception of divinity are the Brahman's province, born out of his nature. Restraining the mind, curbing the senses, flawless purity, mortification of mind, speech, and body to mold them in tune with the cherished goal, forgiveness, all-pervading righteousness, staunch faith in the one aimed at goal, consciousness of the Supreme Being, the awakening in the realm of the heart of the exhortations coming from God, and the ability to act according to them, are all a Brahman's obligations that arise from his own nature. It might be said, therefore, that the seeker is a Brahman when all these merits are present in him, and the commenced action is an integral part of his nature.
शौर्यं तेजो धृतिर्दाक्ष्यम् युद्धे चाप्यपलायनम् दानमीश्वरभावश्च क्षात्रं कर्म स्वभावजम्.
Valor, majesty, dexterity, unwillingness to retreat in battle, charity, and sovereignty are the natural province of a Kshatriya. Bravery, achievement of divine glory, forbearance, competence in meditation, skill in action, disinclination to run away from struggle with the material world, relinquishment of all, and domination of all feelings by a feeling for the Supreme Being. These are all activities born out.
कृषिगौरक्षवाणिज्यम् वैश्यकर्म स्वभावजम् परिचर्यात्मकं कर्म शूद्रस्यापि स्वभावजम्.
Farming, protection of cows, the senses, and commerce are the natural province of a Vaishya, whereas rendering service is the natural calling of a Shudra. Agriculture, rearing of cattle, and commerce are duties in keeping with the nature of a Vaishya. Why only preservation of cows? Should we slaughter buffaloes? Is it wrong to keep goats? There is nothing at all like all of this. In the ancient Vedic text, the word go, or cow, was used to refer to the senses. So protection of, quote, cows here means care of the senses. The senses are protected by discernment, non-attachment, restraint, and steadfastness. They are, on the other hand, riven and rendered feeble by lust, wrath, avarice, and attachment. Spiritual acquisition is the only true wealth. This is our one true asset, and once it has been earned, it stays on with us forever. Gradual amassing of this wealth in the course of our struggle with the world of matter or nature is trade. The acquisition of knowledge, which is the most precious of all riches, is commerce. And what is meant by the word farming? The body is like a piece of earth. The seeds which are sown in it sprout in the form of sanskar, the merits of action, the force that is built up by all the actions in previous lives. Arjuna is told that the seed, the initial impulse of selfless action, is never destroyed. Vaishya is the third step of the ordained action, of contemplation of the Supreme Being, and preservation of the seeds of divine meditation that are sown in this patch of earth, the body, while at the same time opposing hostile impulses, is agriculture. As Goswami Tulsidas has said, whereas the wise husbandman farms well and with care, they who are of deficient wisdom are insensible and arrogant. To protect the senses thus, to store spiritual wealth amidst the skirmishes of nature, and to always strengthen contemplation of the ultimate essence. These meanings of trade, commerce, farming, and agriculture, these are the province of Vaishya. According to Krishna, the omnipresent God is the final outcome of yajna. The devout souls who partake of this fruit are emancipated from all sins, and it is the seeds of this action that are sown by the meditative process. To protect this germ is true husbandry. In Vedic writings, food means the supreme spirit. God is the only real sustenance, the food. The soul is fully placated at the completion of the exercise of contemplation and never again knows any craving. Once the exercise has been brought to successful conclusion, the soul is freed from the cycle of birth and death. To go ahead sowing the seeds of this food is true husbandry. To serve those who have attained to a higher spiritual status, revered men of accomplishment, this is the duty of Shudra. Rather than meaning base or low, Shudra means one with the deficient knowledge. It is the seeker at the lowest stage who is a Shudra. It is but proper that this initiate worshipper should begin his quest with rendering service. Service to men of accomplishment will in the course of time generate nobler impulses in him, and he will thus gradually move up to the higher Vaishya, Kshatriya, and Brahmin stages. And ultimately he will go beyond Varn, the properties of nature, and become one with God. Character is a dynamic entity. There is change in an individual's Varn, along with changes in his character. So in fact, Varn are the four, excellent, good, medium, and low, stages, the four steps, low and high, which seekers who tread the path of action have to climb. This is so because the action in question is only one, the ordained action. The only way to final attainment, according to Krishna, is that the worshipper should begin his journey in keeping with the attributes of his own nature.
स्वे स्वे कर्मण्यभिरतः संसर्गेषु सिद्धिं लभते नरः स्वकर्मनिरतः सिद्धिं यथा विन्दति तच्छृणु.
Commitment to his own inborn duty brings man to the ultimate accomplishment, and you should listen to me on how a man achieves perfection through dedication to his innate calling. The perfection that is ultimately achieved is realization of God. Krishna told Arjuna earlier also that he would reach this final goal by engaging in action, the real prescribed action.
यतः प्रवृत्तिर्भूतानां येन सर्वमिदं ततम् स्वकर्मणा तमभ्यर्च्य सिद्धिं विन्दति मानवः.
By adoration of that God who has created all beings and who pervades the whole universe, through the undertaking of his natural calling, man attains to final accomplishment. The seeker achieves final consummation through performance of his native duties. It is therefore essential that he should constantly keep his mind fixed on God, adore him, and proceed on his way step by step. Instead of making any gain, a junior student even loses whatever he has if he sits in a senior class. So the law is that one should climb step by step. It was said in the 6th verse of this chapter that yagya, charity, and penance ought to be undertaken after abandonment of attachment and the fruits of action. Now, stressing the same point, Krishna says again that even a partially enlightened man ought to begin from the same point, from self-surrender to God.
श्रेयान् स्वधर्मो विगुणः परधर्मात् स्वनुष्ठितात् स्वभावनियतं कर्म कुर्वन्नाप्नोति किल्बिषम्.
Even though unmeritorious, one's own native calling is superior to the office of others, for a man carrying out his natural obligation does not bring sin upon himself. Although inferior, one's own obligation is better than even the well-performed duties of others. A man absorbed in performing a task that is determined by his own nature does not incur sin insofar as he is not subjected to the endless cycle of entrances and exits, of birth and death. It is quite often that worshippers begin to feel disenchanted with the service they are rendering. They look at the more accomplished seekers who are absorbed in meditation and grow envious of the honor that is accorded them because of their merits. So novices at once fall to imitating. According to Krishna, however, imitation or envy can be of no avail. The final accomplishment is only by dedication to one's own native calling, not by its abandonment.
सहजं कर्म कौन्तेय सदोषमपि न त्यजेत् सर्वारम्भा हि दोषेण धूमेनाग्निरिवावृता.
One's innate duty ought not to be forsaken, O son of Kunti, even if it is blemished, because all actions are impaired by some flaw or the other, as fire is shrouded by smoke. It is but expected that the actions of the novice seeker are flawed, for their doer is yet far from perfection. But even these actions must not be given up. Moreover, there is no action that is unimpeachable, and action has to be undertaken even by one who belongs to the Brahmin class. Imperfections, the obscuring pall of nature, are there until there is steady devotion. They come to an end only when the action natural to a Brahmin is dissipated in God. But what are the attributes of the accomplisher at the point where action is no longer of any avail?
असक्त बुद्धि सर्वत्र जितात्मा विगत स्पृहः नैष्कर्म्य सिद्धिं परमां संन्यासेनाधिगच्छति.
He whose intellect is aloof all round, who is without desire, and who has conquered his mind, attains to the ultimate state that transcends all action through renunciation. Renunciation is, as we have already seen, complete self-abnegation. It is the condition in which the seeker abandons whatever he has, and only then does he reach the point when no further action is needed. Renunciation and attainment of the supreme state of actionlessness are indeed synonymous. The yogi who has reached the state of actionlessness attains to the Supreme Being.
सिद्धिं प्राप्तो यथा ब्रह्म तथाप्नोति निबोध मे. समासेनैव कौन्तेय निष्ठा ज्ञानस्य या परा.
Learn in brief from me, O son of Kunti, of how one who is immaculate achieves realization of the Supreme Being, which represents the culmination of knowledge. The following verses expound that way.
बुद्ध्या विशुद्धया युक्तो धृत्यात्मानं नियम्य च शब्दादीन् विषयांस् त्यक्त्वा रागद्वेषौ व्युदस्य च.
Blessed with a pure intellect, firmly in command of the self, with objects of sensual gratification like sound forsaken, with both fondness and revulsion destroyed.
विविक्त सेवी लघ्वाशी यत वाक्कायमानसः ध्यान योग परो नित्यम् वैराग्यं समुपाश्रितः.
Dwelling in seclusion, eating frugally, subdued in mind, speech, and body, incessantly given to the yoga of meditation, firmly resigned.
अहंकारं बलं दर्पं कामं क्रोधं परिग्रहम् विमुच्य निर्ममः शान्तो ब्रह्मभूयाय कल्पते.
Giving up conceit, arrogance of power, yearning, ill humor, and acquisitiveness, devoid of attachment, and in possession of a mind at repose, a man is worthy of becoming one with God. It is further said of such a worshipper,
ब्रह्मभूतः प्रसन्नात्मा न शोचति न काङ्क्षति समः सर्वेषु भूतेषु मद्भक्तिं लभते पराम्.
In this serene tempered man, who views all beings equally, who abides intently in the Supreme Being, neither grieving over nor hankering after anything, there is fostered a faith in me that transcends all else. Now faith is at the stage where an outcome can ensue from it, namely, in the form of God realization.
भक्त्या मामभिजानाति यावान्यश्चास्मि तत्त्वतः ततो मां तत्त्वतो ज्ञात्वा विशते तदनन्तरम्.
Through his transcendental faith, he knows my essence well, what my reach is, and having thus known my essence, he is at once united with me. The Supreme Being is perceived at the moment of attainment, and no sooner has this perception come about than the worshipper finds his own soul blessed with the attributes of God himself, that his soul is, like God, indestructible, immortal, eternal, ineffable, and universal. When the maladies of vanity, brute power, lust, wrath, arrogance, and infatuation that force one down into the ravines of nature are rendered feeble, and virtues such as discernment, non-attachment, self-restraint, firmness of will, abiding in solitude, and meditation that lead one to God are fully developed and active, the seeker is equipped to be united with the Supreme Being. It is this ability that is called transcendental faith, and it is by this that the worshipper comes to apprehend the ultimate reality. He then knows what God is, and knowing his divine glories, he is at once merged with him. Putting it differently, Brahm, reality, God, the Supreme Spirit, and the Self are all substitutes for each other. Knowing any one of them, we come to know them all. This is the final accomplishment, the final liberation, the final goal. So the Gita is unambiguous in its view that in both the way of knowledge or discernment, or the way of renunciation, and the way of selfless action, the ordained deed, meditation, has to be entered upon and accomplished for the attainment of the supreme state of actionlessness. The importance of worship and meditation for the worshipper who has renounced all has been stressed so far. And now, by introducing the idea of devotion, the same is said for the yogi who undertakes selfless action.
कर्माण्यपि सदा कुर्वाणो मद्व्यपाश्रयः मत्प्रसादादवाप्नोति शाश्वतं पदमव्ययम्.
Although engaged in action wholeheartedly, one who finds refuge in me achieves the everlasting, indestructible, final bliss. The deed to be performed is the same, the ordained action, the exercise of yajna, and to gain it, there must be self-surrender.
चेतसा सर्वकर्माणि मयि सन्न्यस्य मत्परः बुद्धियोगमुपाश्रित्य मच्चित्तः सततं भव.
Earnestly resigning all your deeds to me, finding shelter in me, and embracing the yoga of knowledge, you should ever fix your mind on me. Arjuna is counseled to sincerely yield all his actions, whatever he is capable of doing, to Krishna, to rest in his mercy rather than depend upon his own prowess, to find shelter in Krishna, to adopt the attitude of yoga, and always bring his mind to bear on him. Yoga means completion, unity, that which brings griefs to an end and provides access to God. Its mode also is a unity, the exercise of yajna, which is founded on restraint of the attaching impulses of the mind and senses, the regulation of the incoming and outgoing breath, and on meditation. Its outcome, finally, also is a unity with the eternal God. This is further elaborated in the next verse.
मच्चित्तः सर्वदुर्गाणि मत्प्रसादात् तरिष्यसि अथ चेत्त्वमहङ्कारान् न श्रोष्यसि विनङ्क्ष्यसि.
Ever resting on me, you will be saved from all afflictions and gain deliverance, but you shall be destroyed if out of arrogance you do not pay heed to my words. Thus, always focusing his mind on Krishna, Arjuna will conquer the citadels of the mind and the senses. As Goswami Tulsidas has put it, even celestial beings seated at the portals of these forts obstinately keep the shutters ajar as the breezes of carnal pleasure blow in. The mind and the senses at the core are the impregnable redoubts, but Arjuna can storm them by aiming his thoughts at God alone. On the other hand, however, he shall be undone and deprived of the ultimate good if out of vanity he does not pay heed to Krishna's words. This point is now reaffirmed.
यदहङ्कारमाश्रित्य न योत्स्य इति मन्यसे मिथ्यैष व्यवसायस्ते प्रकृतिस्त्वां नियोक्ष्यति.
Your egotistic resolve not to fight is surely mistaken, for your nature will compel you to take up arms in the war.
स्वभाव व्रजेन कौन्तेय निबद्धस्वेन कर्मणा कर्तुं नेच्छसि यन्मोहात् करिष्यस्य वशोऽपि तत्.
Bound by your natural calling, even against your resolve, O son of Kunti, you will have to undertake the deed you are reluctant to do because of your self-deception. Arjuna's innate disinclination to retreat from the battle with nature will compel him to set upon the task before him. The subject is concluded with this, and Krishna next speaks on the dwelling of God.
ईश्वरः सर्वभूतानां हृद्देशेऽर्जुन तिष्ठति भ्रामयन् सर्वभूतानि यन्त्रारूढानि मायया.
Propelling all living things that bestride a body, which is but a contrivance, by his Maya, O Arjun, God abides in the hearts of all beings. But if God lives in our hearts and is close to us, why are we ignorant of his presence? This is so because the contraptions we call body are driven by the power of Maya, the universal ignorance or illusion, by virtue of which we consider the unreal universe as real and distinct from the Supreme Spirit. So this physical mechanism is a grave impediment, and it takes us round endlessly through one birth after another. Where, then, can we find shelter or refuge?
तमेव शरणं गच्छ सर्वभावेन भारत तत्प्रसादात् परां शान्तिं स्थानं प्राप्स्यसि शाश्वतम्.
Seek refuge with all your heart, O Bharat Arjun, in that God by whose grace you will attain to repose and the everlasting, ultimate bliss. So if we have to meditate, we should do it within the realm of the heart. If we know this, and yet seek for God in a temple, mosque, or church, we but waste our time. Notwithstanding this, however, as it was said earlier also, these places of formal worship have their importance for seekers with inadequate awareness. The heart is the true abode of God.
इति ते ज्ञानमाख्यातम् गुह्याद् गुह्यतरं मया विमृश्यैतदशेषेण यथेच्छसि तथा कुरु.
Thus have I imparted to you the knowledge which is the most mysterious of all abstruse learning. So reflect well on the whole of it, and then you may do as you wish. The wisdom that Krishna has accorded is the truth. It marks the sphere where the seeker has to make his quest, and it is also the point of attainment. Yet the harsh fact is that God is commonly not perceptible. Krishna now deliberates upon the way out of this difficulty.
सर्वगुह्यतमं भूयः शृणु मे परमं वचः इष्टोऽसि मे दृढमिति ततो वक्ष्यामि ते हितम्.
Listen yet again to my most secret words. Indeed, Felicitas, that I am going to speak to you because you are the dearest to me. Krishna endeavors once more to enlighten Arjuna. God always stands by the seeker, for he is so dear to him. Arjuna is beloved of Krishna, and any benediction that the Lord bestows upon him cannot be too much. He will incessantly exert himself for the sake of his devotee. But what is the blessed revelation that Krishna is going to make to Arjuna?
Manmana bhava madbhakto madhyaji mam namaskuru mame vaishyasi satyante pratijane priyosi me.
I give you my sincere pledge, because you are so dear to me, that you must attain to me if you keep me in mind, adore me, worship me, and bow in obeisance to me. Arjuna was exhorted earlier to seek refuge in the God that dwells in the realm of the heart, and now he is prompted to find shelter under Krishna. He is also told that in order to find this sanctuary, he has to listen again to the Lord's most esoteric words. Does not Krishna intend to communicate by this that finding shelter under a noble teacher-preceptor is indispensable for the seeker who has taken to the spiritual path? Krishna, himself a Yogeshwar, then enlightens Arjuna on the way of true self-surrender.
सर्वधर्मान् परित्यज्य मामेकं शरणं व्रज अहं त्वा सर्वपापेभ्यो मोक्षयिष्यामि मा शुचः.
Grieve not, for I shall free you from all sins if you abandon all other obligations and seek refuge in me alone. Arjuna is counseled that he has to rid himself of concern about what category of doer he is, whether Brahmin or Kshatriya or Vaishya or Shudra, and look for shelter under Krishna alone. By doing so, he will be absolved of all iniquities and afflictions. The accomplished teacher-preceptor takes it upon himself to effect the gradual elevation of the pupil to ever more refined spiritual states and his release from all sins, if, instead of worrying about his position on the path of action, the pupil single-mindedly seeks refuge in his mentor and looks up to no one else but his accomplished teacher-preceptor. All sages have said the same. When a holy writing is rendered, it may appear that it is for all, but it is truly secret teaching. Secret undoubtedly because it is permitted only to those who are spiritually equipped to study and profit by it. Arjuna is such a deserving pupil, and so it is that Krishna instructs him so earnestly. Now Krishna himself elaborates the merits of the worthy pupil.
Idam te na tapaskaya na bhaktaya kadachana न चाशुश्रूषवे वाच्यम् न च मां योऽभ्यसूयति.
This Gita, which has been articulated for you, must never be made known to one who is bereft of penance, devotion, and of willingness to listen, as also to one who speaks ill of me. Krishna was a realized sage, and along with adorers, he must also have faced some slanderers. The Gita is not for people who speak maliciously of God. But then, to whom should this sacred knowledge be made known?
य इमं परमं गुह्यम् मद्भक्तेष्वभिधास्यति भक्तिं मयि परां कृत्वा मामेवैष्यत्य संशयः.
The one who, with firm devotion to me, imparts this most secret teaching to my worshippers, will doubtlessly attain to me. And then Krishna speaks about the one who disseminates the sacred knowledge.
न च तस्मान् मनुष्येषु कश्चिन्मे प्रियकृत्तमः भविता न च मे तस्मात् अन्यः प्रियतरो भुवि.
Neither is there among mankind any doer who is dearer to me than this man, nor will there be any in the world who is dearer to me than him. The man who enlightens Krishna's devotees, souls who adhere to the Lord, is the most beloved of him, because he is the only source of benediction, the only highway that leads one to God. He is the one who teaches men to go along the right path.
अध्येष्यते च य इमम् धर्म्यं संवादमावयोः ज्ञानयज्ञेन तेनाहम् इष्टस्यामिति मे मतिः.
And it is my belief that I shall have been worshipped through the yagya of knowledge by one who makes a thorough study of this sacred dialogue between us. The yagya of knowledge is that the outcome of which is wisdom. The nature of this wisdom has been elaborated earlier. This wisdom is the awareness that is acquired along with direct perception of God. And it is with such wisdom, such awareness, that the dedicated and industrious disciple of the Gita will adore Krishna. This is something of which the Lord is firmly assured.
श्रद्धावाननसूयश्च शृणुयादपि यो नरः सोऽपि मुक्तः शुभान् लोकान् प्राप्नुयात् पुण्यकर्मणाम्.
Even he will be freed from sins who just hears the Gita with devoutness and without any ill will, and he will secure the worlds of the righteous. Even hearing the teachings of the Gita with faith and without any carping is enough to elevate one to a superior mode of existence, for by this also its sacred precepts will be inculcated in the mind. Krishna has thus, in verses 67 to 71 of the present chapter, said that imparting of the teachings of the Gita to the deserving is as vital as withholding them from the undeserving. Since even hearing the secret teaching of the Gita motivates the worshipper to the required endeavor, the one who just hears it will also surely attain to Krishna. As for the one who propagates the scripture, no one else is dearer to the Lord than this man. The man who studies the Gita worships Krishna by the yagya of knowledge. True knowledge is what issues forth from the process called yagya. In the verses under consideration, therefore, the Lord has pointed out the benefits of study, dissemination, and hearing of the Gita. Now, at the end, he asks Arjuna if he has understood and assimilated his words.
Kacchidetatshrutam Partha Tvayaiकाग्रेण चेतसा कच्चिदज्ञानसम्मोहः प्रणष्टस्ते धनञ्जय.
Have you, O Parth, listened intently to my words? And, O Dhananjay, is your delusion born out of ignorance dispelled?
नष्टो मोहः स्मृतिर्लब्धा त्वत्प्रसादान्मयाच्युत स्थितोऽस्मि गतसन्देहः करिष्ये वचनं तव.
Arjuna said, "Since my ignorance has been dispelled by your grace, O Achyut, and I have recovered discernment, I am free from doubt and shall follow your precepts." Arjuna here states, "Because of your grace, my passion is destroyed. I have regained my memory. I am consistent being bereft of doubts, and am ever ready to obey your orders." Now, whereas Arjuna was perplexed at the time of reviewing both the armies at the beginning of the Gita, to find his kith and kin therein, he prayed, "Govinda, how can we be happy after annihilation of our own relatives? Family tradition will be destroyed because of such a war. There will be scarcity of obsequial offerings like rice cakes and so on to the departed ancestors. Mongrelization of castes will take place. We, being wise, are yet ready to commit sin. Why do not we find a way out of committing these sins? Let the armed Kaurava kill me, an unarmed man, in the war, and that death is glorious. Govinda, I am not going to wage war." Saying thus, Arjuna sat down at the back of his chariot. Thus, in the Gita, Arjuna in fact put forward in front of Yogeshwar Krishna a series of big and small questions. For instance, in chapter 2, verse 7, "Please, will you tell me the practice of worship through which I can attain to the absolute good?" In chapter 2, verse 54, "What are the attributes of an enlightened sage?" In verse 1 of chapter 3, "If in your view the way of knowledge is superior, then why do you compel me to do these terrible actions? In verse 36 of chapter 3, even without wishing, under whose guidance does a man commit sin? In verse 4 of chapter 4, your birth is of recent times, whereas the Son was born a long time back. Then how can I believe that you, Krishna, taught yoga to the Son in the distant past, at the time of the beginning of this kalp? In verse 1 of chapter 5, sometimes you praise renunciation, the way of knowledge, and yet at other times you support the way of selfless action. Please tell me, which one of these, finally, is the one by which I can attain to the absolute good? In verse 35 of chapter 6, the mind is very fickle. With slack efforts, what would be his lot? In verses 1 and 2 of chapter 8, Govinda, Krishna, who is it, that supreme being whom you have described? What is the religious knowledge? What are lords of gods and lords of being? Who is the Lord of sacrifice in this body? What is that action? How do you come to be known at the end of time? Thus, Arjuna put forward 7 questions. In verse 17 of chapter 10, Arjuna has evinced curiosity, asking, while meditating incessantly, through what feelings do I call you to mind, to remember you? In verse 4 of chapter 11, he prayed and submitted, I long to see the splendors that have been described by you. In verse 1 of chapter 12, who is the superior possessor of yoga among the devotees who worship you well through unvacillating attentiveness, and those who worship the imperishable, unmanifest Supreme Being? In verse 21 of chapter 14, a man who has surpassed the 3 natural properties is liberated. And how can a man surpass these 3 properties? In verse 1 of chapter 17, what would be the fate of a person who engaged in yajna with dedication and yet does not follow the procedures as laid down by the scriptures? And in verse 1 of chapter 18, oh, the mighty armed, I yearn to learn separately and individually everything about the nature of relinquishment and renunciation. Thus, throughout the Gita, Arjuna continued to put forward questions. The esoteric secrets which could not be asked by him were revealed by Lord Krishna himself. As soon as Arjuna's doubts were dispelled, he was freed from asking questions and said, Govinda, now I am ever ready to obey your instructions. In truth, the questions raised by Arjuna were for the benefit of all mankind, and not for him alone. Without having the answers to these questions, no seeker can progress forward on the path of the highest good. Therefore, to enable a man to obey an enlightened sage teacher, and to progress on the path of the highest good, it is necessary that one should learn the complete teachings of the Gita. Arjuna was convinced and satisfied. In chapter 11, after having revealed his cosmic form, Krishna said in the 54th verse, O Arjuna, a worshipper can directly know this form of mine, acquire its essence, and even become one with it by total and unswerving dedication. And just now he has asked him whether he is rid of his delusion. Arjuna replies that his ignorance is allayed and that his understanding is restored. Now he will act at Krishna's behest. Arjuna's liberation should come along with this realization. He has indeed become whatever he had to be. But Scripture is meant for posterity, and the Gita is here for all of us to avail ourselves of. Thus, the divine message of Yogeshwar Krishna was concluded. At this moment, Sanjay again spoke.
संवादमिममश्रौषम् अद्भुतं रोमहर्षणम्.
Sanjay said, "Thus have I heard the mysterious and sublime dialogue of Vasudev Krishna and the sage-like Arjuna. Arjuna is portrayed as a man with a noble soul. He is a yogi, a seeker, a sage rather than an archer set to kill. But how has Sanjay been enabled to hear the dialogue between Krishna and the saintly Arjuna?"
व्यासप्रसादाच्छ्रितवान् एतद्गुह्यमहं परम् योगं योगेश्वरात् कृष्णात् साक्षात् कथयतः स्वयम्.
It is by the blessing of the most revered Vyas that I have heard this transcendental, most mysterious yoga enunciated directly by the Lord of Yoga, Krishna himself. Sanjay regards Krishna as a master of yoga, one who is a yogi himself and who is also endowed with the gift of imparting yoga to others.
राजन् संस्मृत्य संस्मृत्य संवादमिममद्भुतम् केशवार्जुनयोः पुण्यम् हृष्यामि च मुहुर्मुहुः.
The recollection of the felicitous and marvelous colloquy between Keshav Krishna and Arjuna transports me, O King Dhritarashtra, to sublime joy, time after time. We too can experience Sanjay's bliss if we remember the sacred dialogue with perfect contentment. Sanjay then recalls the Lord's miraculous bearing and speaks of it.
तच्च संस्मृत्य संस्मृत्य रूपमत्यद्भुतं हरेः विस्मयो मे महान् राजन् हृष्यामि च पुनः पुनः.
Recalling the amazing visage of the Lord again and again, O King, I am lost in wonder and ecstasy over and over. Sanjay's rapture can be ours also, if we incessantly keep in our minds the aspect of the cherished end. That brings us to the last verse of the Gita, in which Sanjay states his final conclusion.
यत्र योगेश्वरः कृष्णो यत्र पार्थो धनुर्धरः तत्र श्रीर्विजयो भूतिः ध्रुवा नीतिर्मतिर्मम. तत्र श्रीर्विजयो भूतिः ध्रुवा नीतिर्मतिर्मम.
Good fortune, conquest, splendor, and steadfast wisdom abide wherever are Lord Krishna and the noble archer Arjuna. Such is my conviction. Intent contemplation and firm restraint of the senses are Arjuna's bow, the legendary Gandiva. so it is that Arjuna is a sage who meditates with equanimity. So wherever Yogeshwar Krishna and he are, there too dwell the triumph after which there is no defeat, the magnificence of God, and the firmness of resolve that enables one to be constant in this inconstant world. Such is the well-deliberated judgment of Sanjay, of the seer who is gifted with celestial vision. The great archer Arjuna is no longer amidst us, but were steadfast wisdom and the glory that comes with spiritual conquest for him alone? The Gita is a dramatization of an historical event that belonged to a certain time, namely the age that is known as Dwapar. This does not mean, however, that Arjuna's realization of the truth of God came to an end with the seizing of his time. Yogeshwar Krishna has assured us repeatedly that he abides in the realm of the heart. He exists within all of us. He is also within you. Arjuna is a symbol of affectionate devotion, which is but another name of the mind's inclination and dedication to the cherished goal. If a worshipper is endowed with such devotion, perpetual triumph against the demeaning properties of nature is assured. With such devotion, there must always necessarily be steadfast wisdom. Rather than being confined to a certain place, time, or individual, these attainments are universal, forever and for all. So long as beings exist, God must dwell in their hearts, and the soul must impatiently hunger for the Supreme Being, and he who is affectionately devoted to God will attain to Arjuna's status. Every one of us can, therefore, aspire hopefully to the ultimate bliss of direct perception of God. Conclusion. At the beginning of the 18th, the concluding chapter of the Gita, Arjuna wishes to be enlightened on the similarity as well as the distinction between relinquishment and renunciation. Krishna has pronounced a judgment, which is that yajna, penance, and charity must never be forsaken, for they bring deliverance to men of discernment. So fostering them, while also giving up unrighteous impulses that are inimical to them, is true renunciation. Such renunciation is perfect, but relinquishment with a desire for some profit in exchange is tainted by passion and moral blindness, and it is definitely evil when the prescribed deed is forsaken out of self-deception. Renunciation is the crowning point of resignation. Performance of the prescribed task and the rapture that results from meditation are indeed virtuous, while sensual pleasure is an outcome of infatuation. And the pleasure in which there is no prospect whatsoever of the ultimate union with God undoubtedly issues forth from ignorance. This chapter also sheds light on the nature of renunciation. The resigning of all one has is renunciation. Mere putting on of a certain kind of attire is not renunciation. Absorption in the ordained deed, while leading a life of seclusion, with a due appraisal of one's own strength, or with a sense of self-surrender, is inescapable. Renunciation is the name of the abandonment of all action, along with consummation, and so but a synonym for the final deliverance. That absolution is the crowning point of renunciation. Thus concludes the 18th chapter in the Upanishad of Srimad Bhagavad Gita on the knowledge of the Supreme Spirit, the science of yoga, and the dialogue between Krishna and Arjuna entitled Sannyas Yoga, or the Yoga of Renunciation. Thus concludes Swami Aggadanand's exposition of the 18th chapter in Yathartha Gita. Hari Om Tat Sat.